Hello everyone, my name is Steve, and today I'm gonna teach you how to implement a logic to pick up a sword or any other item to your player character and then drop it back into the world. For this tutorial, I'm using the default third-person map provided by Unreal Engine, but of course you can totally follow along and implement this in your own world. I'm using this sword that I found for free on the Fab Marketplace. But of course, this should work with any other item. All right, so we're gonna pick up where we left off in the previous video. So I'm gonna go to the third person character blueprint, which is where the magic happens. And just to give you a super quick review of what we did last time, because we're gonna be building on top of that, is once the game begins playing, we're gonna spawn the actor, which is the sword that we've been using in the previous tutorial, and then we're gonna attach it to component, which is this character mesh. Now our goal is to pick up the item not at the beginning of the game, but once we sort of touch or overlap with the item in the world. So the first thing that comes to mind is to replace this trigger. So I'm going to delete that. By event actor begin overlap. So as soon as it starts overlapping our player characters with, we need to specify with what. Here I can do BP underscore sword. So we're saying we're going to cast to sword because we're saying this is what we want the overlap to trigger with. And I'm just going to connect the execution node here. That should work. So I'm going to save and compile. And if I go back and click play, and now we approach the sword, we get an error. We get a crash saying that there is an infinite loop detected. And that is actually quite self-explanatory. The issue is that we are using this sword that we are spawning and attaching to our player character also as the trigger to begin the spawning and attaching. So you can probably see the circular logic. And especially if I show you the viewport, because as you can see, the right hand that we're spawning the sword in is within the collision capsule that we have defined here. So that means essentially as soon as we spawn the sword or like attach the sword in this hand, it is immediately going to start overlapping, right? And that's immediately going to start triggering this event actor begin overlap node, which then runs this rest of the logic. So again, it spawns the sword, which starts overlapping, which spawns the sword, etc., etc. So we have to work around this a little bit. Thankfully, there is a relatively simple fix where we're gonna create a new blueprint, a separate blueprint that triggers the pickup event, and then we're gonna have a separate blueprint that is gonna be representing the sword that we actually hold. So here in my medieval sword blueprint, I'm gonna click with my right mouse button, create child blueprint class, and I'm gonna call it BPC sword equipped. So that's gonna be the one that we're gonna be holding, and I'm gonna create one more, which is gonna be BPC sword pickup, BPC. Right, so now we have these two, and we don't really need to do anything inside of them, but we're gonna navigate back to our blueprint. And here we need to replace a few things. So first I'm gonna get rid of this cast node because we're casting to the original BP sword. And instead I'm gonna do BPC sword pickup, because the pickup is the one that we're gonna be using to trigger this logic. So we're gonna connect it back. And then the second thing is that we need to replace this class of which defines the sword that we are gonna be equipping. So again, BPC sword equipped, right? So now the logic is split. We're gonna use one blueprint to trigger the event, and then we're gonna use another blueprint to spawn and to attach the component. Now we just need to make sure that we actually place the sword pickup in the world instead of the previous parent blueprint, because that one is no longer doing anything. So now I have the BPC sword pickup, and if I run up to it, I spawn a sword in my hand. All right, let's expand this further. So now that I've picked up a sword, the one that I have picked up that was originally on the ground is still there, which to me feels like a little bit of a duplicate. So what I want to do is make the pickup sword disappear once I have already equipped it in my hand. That is actually super simple. So I'm just going to navigate back to the player character blueprint. Everything's going to be happening in here. And since we have a reference to this BPC sword pickup, I can disconnect this and add a super simple node, which is destroy actor. I'm going to connect the execution node. And here we have to connect the reference pin. So as BPC sword pickup, I'm going to connect that to the target because otherwise we would be deleting the character mesh of the player character. If I compile, go back, I run up to sword, I pick up a sword, and the original one disappears. Success. Now there is one more thing that I would like to add to our logic, which is, let's say there are multiple weapons or multiple instances of this sword that I can find in my world. So I'm just gonna make a few copies like this. And so if I run up to one, we've just demonstrated, he picks up the sword, the old one disappears. But if I run up to next one, it also disappears, but I'm sort of like, as a player, from the player perspective, I'm not like getting a second sword in my other hand or anything like that. It's just deleting, the potential sword pickups, which in my opinion is not desirable because I already have a sword in my hand, so I don't necessarily want to keep, destroying the sword pickups. So we can add a logic that's gonna say that once I already have a sword in my hand, I'm not gonna interact or pick up or delete or do anything about the other ones. So again, in my BP third person character in the original blueprint, now we will need a variable. So in the variable menu over here, I'm gonna create a new one. I'm gonna call it something like has sword equipped, and I'm gonna keep it as Boolean. I'm gonna compile so that we can access it, and we can see that has sword equipped by default is false, which makes sense in our case, so I'm not gonna change it, because when the player spawns, obviously he doesn't have anything in his hand. Now, we're gonna need this, so I need to, at the beginning of this sequence, we want to check if we should run this sequence, if we should pick up something, if we should delete something. So I'm just gonna make a little bit of space over here because we're gonna check at the very beginning if the player has already sword picked up, then we don't want to do anything. If yes, then we're going to run this whole sequence. I'm going to drag this variable onto the canvas, and I'm going to hold control, which is going to give us the sort of like the get value of this variable. And from the red pin, I'm going to drag and I'm going to type in branch. Branch essentially is a node that evaluates if condition is true or false. Right, so that's perfect in our case because we want to evaluate if the sword is or is not equipped. There are only two options, so that's just fantastic. I'm gonna disconnect this execution node by Alt and clicking over here, and we're gonna interject this this branching node over here. So from execution, I'm gonna drag over here, and then if sword is equipped is true, if there is a sword in hand, I don't want to do anything, so I'm not going to connect this to anywhere. And then if it's false, if I don't have anything in my hand, then I want to run this whole logic. And it is literally as simple as connecting one branch and checking this variable if has sword equipped. Now I can save and compile and go back to the game, and I can pick up the sword, and I can run up to the next one, but it's also going to disappear because I forgot to do one super important thing, which is that when we run this whole logic of picking up the sword, we're not really telling the game that, hey, hold up now, he already has something in his hand. So we will need to work with this variable again. I'm going to put it at the very end. So I'm going to drag on the canvas, and this time I'm going to hold Alt. And when I release, it's going to give me this set function. So again, I'm going to connect the execution, and we're setting the value of has sword equipped, and we want to set it to true, which means that, okay, now there is something in my hand, or there is a sword in my hand. So I don't want you to do anything, because now if I return at the very beginning of this function, when I run up to a new sword once we've already picked up one, then has sword equipped is going to be true. And I'm going to check for this condition and it's going to evaluate to true and it's not going to run anything. So now if I save and compile, I'm going to go back to the game. I'm going to right now I don't have anything in my hand. So if I run up to a sword, I can still pick it up. That's fine. But if I run up to the second one, nothing happens, right? I can run through them. I'm overlapping with them. Nothing's happening. And that is actually desirable. All right, let's extend this further. I would like to be able, once I pick up a sword, to be able to drop it. Thankfully, it's also super simple. First, we will need something to trigger the action of dropping the weapon. So I'm going to go to the input folder, which is in content and input. And then there should already be a folder called actions. And if I right click here, I'm going to go into the input menu, input action, IA, drop sword. You could call it a drop weapon. You could call it anything. And we don't really need to do anything in there. I'm just going to quickly open it and walk you through. The value type is digital Boolean, which essentially says that either it's true or false. Either the key that we're going to use is going to be pressed or not. And the trigger, you can leave empty because we're going to define that in the input mapping context in a second. And the modifiers, you can also leave that empty. So I'm going to close this and navigate back to the input folder. And here we're interested in IMC default. That's the input mapping context. So you open that and you go to the default key mappings, which is the array of all the mappings that's been set up previously. And we're going to add a new one. Here you can just click and in the menu you find the drop sword action. And here we're going to define what triggers it. So, it could be any of these controllers, but I'm going to leave the keyboard in there. I'm going to click and I'm going to press the key that I want to be triggering this action. So I'm going to press R, for example. It doesn't really matter. You can press anything else as long as it's not really overlapping with some of the mappings that are already set up. So for example, space bar in here. And that's all we need to do in the input mapping context. So let's navigate back to the player character blueprint and we're going to click right and type in IA drop sword, and we're going to pick the enhanced action event, right? So we get this red node over here, which is going to be used to trigger the action of dropping the sword. So here we're going to be interested in getting the started pin. And now what we want to do is we want to do essentially the reverse of what we did up here, where we attached actor to component. Here we want to detach from component, right? So it's exactly the reverse. So I'm just going to move it here because I can show you in the quick and sort of dirty way, which is useful when you're like quickly prototyping something. Here in the return value, once we spawn this actor, this blueprint gives us a reference to whatever we are working with here, which is the BPC sword equipped blueprint. So I can drag from the same pin again, and I can type in detach from actor. And I'm going to connect the execution pin from started. I'm going to save, compile, and if I go back to the game and I pick up the sword, I can just press R and it disappears now. So it's working, but here you've noticed one first bug that we have, because the first bug is that we cannot really pick up a new sword once we drop the previous one. And that's actually a super simple fix as well. Once we detach from actor over here, we need to tell the game that, hey, we're no longer holding a weapon. So again, just like we reverse this attached to actor component, we're also going to reverse this set value here, which we're setting the has sword equipped to true after we attach it. So we're attaching it and we're saying, now we are holding a weapon. Now we are detaching it. So just like that, we're going to say you're no longer holding a weapon. So I'm just going to copy paste, or again, you can just alt drag from the variable menu over here. I'm going to connect the execution node, but this time I'm going to change it to has sword equipped false, right? So once we press the button, we're going to detach the sword from actor, and we're going to say the player is no longer holding a sword. And so if I go back to the game, I pick this up and I press R and I walk up to a new one, it's going to pick it up and I can drop it and pick up another one and drop it. So now it seems to be working even when we repeat the process multiple times. However, I want to address this setup here. So not only, we're creating a little bit of spaghetti blueprint here, which is usually not desirable, but also, maybe you're going to be working with many different actors and you're going to be reusing this spawned actor reference in multiple places of your code, in which case it would get, first of all, messy, but sometimes even impossible to actually create the desired blueprint. So we need to do this slightly differently. And what I had in mind is that instead of using this reference directly, we're going to create a variable that's going to hold the reference to this spawned sword. And we can then use this reference anywhere in our code, elsewhere, even in places which we potentially cannot directly connect to this pin. And we can still access it and work with this. So I'm going to disconnect the target over here and the execution pin over here. And we're just going to interject sort of a variable in this area over here. So first we need that variable. So back in the variables menu, I'm going to click plus. We're going to call it equipped sword. And we're going to change the type to actor. And in the actor menu, we're going to do object reference. So you should have this blue actor type over here. I'm going to compile. And now we need to set it over here. So again, I'm going to drag from the equipped sword variable, hold Alt, and connect it in between these two nodes. So we connect both the execution and the return value. So we essentially do exactly the same thing as we did before, but just in between these two steps, we save essentially the reference to whatever we're spawning over here. Now this has a huge advantage because I can go back here to where we have been deleting the actor, and I can drag from the equipped sword variable, press Control, and get the reference to it and use it as the target, right? So not only, this implementation is somewhat cleaner, like we're no longer adding more spaghetti, but also, I can use this reference anywhere. So this is the better approach. So if I save and compile, now obviously from the player perspective, nothing is really changed. So I can just pick up a new sword, drop it, pick up a new sword, drop it, etc. But it is less prone to bugs and, it's just a better code overall. And the final thing that I would like to implement here is that once we drop a sword, yes, it disappears from our hand, but it doesn't really reappear in the world, which might make sense if you drop something in the world. You're not just like deleting it or sending it to the void, you're sort of placing it back into the world. And it's actually super simple to implement as well. Now, there are multiple ways that you could do this, and some of them are slightly more complex, slightly more robust. Here in this video, I'm going to show you this like sort of quick and dirty way how to do this very easily. But make sure to hit the subscribe button, because if you're watching this video right now, I'm recording a follow-up which sort of goes into these other methods that you might want to use depending on your desired gameplay or implementation. But it is a large enough topic to be a separate video, so I'm working on it. Make sure to hit that subscribe. In this video, however, I'm going to reuse the logic that we have here when we spawn the actor. So I'm literally just going to copy these three nodes over here. I'm going to press Ctrl C. I'm going to press Ctrl V, but we're not going to attach it to anything this time. So I can ignore these final nodes, and we're just going to recycle the ones that are spawning it. So first thing is that we need to change whatever we are spawning. So I'm going to type in BPC sword pickup, because this time we're not spawning the one that you're supposed to hold in your hand, but we're spawning the one that's supposed to live in the world and that you can then pick up. And we also need to get the socket transform, but we don't want to be spawning it in the hand because that would create the same infinite loop bug that we had before. Instead, we are going to use a new socket. So in the, if I go to characters, mannequins, meshes, and we're working with the Quinn mesh. So I'm going to open that one, and I'm going to go to the skeletal skeletal mesh. And here we're going to add a new socket into which we're going to spawn the dropped sword. In Unreal Engine 5.7, there is already one foot R socket. So if you scroll down, I'm going to recycle this one. But the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click W and I'm just going to move it a little bit in front of the character so that the sword actually spawns, not on the character, because again, that would create the bug, but it's going to spawn, I don't know, like a meter in front of the character. If you want to create a new socket for this purpose, then you can just right click any of the body part or any of the bone and click add socket. But I don't want to do that. I'm going to recycle the one that we have here. And you can also add preview asset. So I'm going to click the sword and it's going to sort of show us how the sword is going to appear in the world once we use this socket. So here I know that I just want to move it a little bit up so it doesn't overlap with the ground. And that's all we need to do here. We just need to note the name of the socket here. So I'm just going to press F2, Control C, and I'm going to go back to our blueprint and I'm going to say that I want to be spawning it in socket name food_r_socket. Yours obviously might be named differently. We're going to connect the execution node. And this is all the code that we need for the spawning to happen. So I'm going to save, compile, go back to our level. And when we play, I'm going to pick up a sword that still works. And I can now press R and it drops the sword in front of the character. Now you can probably notice that it is a little bit to the side because the socket is referencing the player ankle because we have used the one that's been used on the ankle. But obviously you could create your own socket and then it would maybe not be rotated like this. The issue though here with this sort of like quick and dirty approach is that if I walk up to a ridge like this, for example, and I press R and the sword sort of spawns in the air, right? If I pick it up again and then walk up to like a wall and I'm gonna just press R over here, then it's sort of gonna disappear, but it's spawned inside this cylinder, which is not desirable, right? But it is a very quick and easy way to like prototype this behavior. But as I said, I'm working on a video that gives you more in-depth different options on how to implement this to maybe reflect some physics, fall to the ground, etc., etc. So make sure to hit that subscribe and check out that video. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. So we have implemented the logic that allows us to pick up a sword, that allows us to then drop it to the ground and like pick it up again, etc. So I hope you liked it, you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Make sure to hit that subscribe button because I'm working tirelessly on releasing more and more tutorials just like this one to aid you and teach you on your Unreal Engine development journey. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.